You know, most of us think of the U.S. Constitution as America's one and only founding document. But what if I told you it was actually a do-over? That's right, today we're going to dive into the forgotten first draft of American government, why it failed so spectacularly, and how that failure literally shaped the nation we know today.
So that's the big question for us today. If the Constitution is the final blueprint for America, what on earth was the rough draft? And what went so wrong that they had to tear it up and start over after only a decade? The answer, it turns out, tells you everything you need to know about what the brand new United States was most afraid of.
All right, let's meet America's first attempt at a government, the Articles of Confederation. Now, this thing was designed with one, and really only one, goal in mind: to be the exact opposite of the powerful, tyrannical British king they had just spent years fighting a war to escape. The founders even called it a firm league of friendship. Kinda nice, right?
So what did this League of Friendship actually look like in practice? Well, try to imagine a government with no president to lead it, no national courts to settle disputes. All you had was a single Congress, where tiny little Rhode Island had the exact same amount of power as massive Virginia. It wasn't really a unified country. It was more like a club, a loose alliance of 13 states that were often rivals.
As you can imagine, this created a government with its hands tied behind its back. I mean, look at this. Congress could declare war on a global superpower like Great Britain, but it had no power to tax its own citizens to pay for that war. It couldn't force states to send soldiers. It basically had to go around with a hat in its hand, begging for money and men. It could coin money, sure, but so could every single state, which, as you can guess, created total economic chaos. It was a government with all the responsibility of a nation, but absolutely none of the power. And if you think that's bad, trying to get anything at all done was a nightmare. To pass any important law, you needed a supermajority. 9 of the 13 states had to agree. Now, think about it. Have you ever tried to get 9 of your friends to agree on what to have for dinner? It's basically impossible. Most of the time, Congress just spun its wheels and nothing happened. Okay, you might be thinking, so it was broken. Why not just fix it? Well, that's the kicker. To change or amend the Articles of Confederation, you needed a unanimous vote. Every single state, all 13, had to agree. This meant the system wasn't just broken, it was designed to be almost impossible to fix. And the proof is in the pudding. In the entire decade the Articles were in effect, not one single amendment was ever passed. 0. The government was completely stuck.
Yeah, this quote from John Green's Crash Course really just sums it all up perfectly. The government under the Articles was made weak on purpose because everyone was terrified of another king. But in trying to avoid a government that was too strong, they accidentally created one that was too weak to do, well, anything.
So, what happens when a government this weak has to face a real crisis? It snaps. And for the Articles of Confederation, that breaking point came in the form of a farmers' rebellion out in Massachusetts that sent absolute shockwaves across the new nation.
You could see it coming. It was really a perfect storm of problems. See, the country was flat broke after the war. The national government couldn't raise any money, so it fell to the states to pay the debts. Massachusetts decided to levy huge taxes, hitting farmers the hardest. And when these farmers, many of whom were veterans of the Revolution, started losing their land because they couldn't pay, they did exactly what they had just learned to do against the British. They picked up their guns and rebelled.
And the national government? It was completely powerless to stop them. It had to rely on a state militia to put the rebellion down. For leaders like George Washington and Alexander Hamilton, this was their worst nightmare come true. It proved in their minds that the government was just too weak to protect private property and prevent total anarchy. They were terrified their League of Friendship was about to collapse into chaos. But it's really important to know that not everybody saw it that way. Thomas Jefferson, who was over in Paris at the time, basically said, hey, a little rebellion now and then is a good thing. He thought it was a sign that people were still watching out for their liberties. But his opinion was definitely not the one that won out with the powerful people back home.
The panic from Shays Rebellion was the final push they needed. A meeting was called in Philadelphia in 1787. Now, the official reason was just to revise the Articles of Confederation. But let's be real, the delegates who showed up, they had a much more radical plan in mind. They were there to start from scratch.
The delegates in Philadelphia were basically walking a tightrope. They knew, without a doubt, they needed a stronger national government, one with 3 branches, a legislature, a president, and courts, to check and balance each other. But they were haunted by 2 equal fears: the tyranny of a government that was too powerful and what they called the tyranny of the people.
the fear that a democratic mob, like the farmers in Shays Rebellion, could just vote to take away the property of the wealthy.
So building this new government was not easy. The delegates were not on the same page about, well, almost anything. The document they ended up creating, our Constitution, is really just a bundle of compromises between all these competing interests. And the first and biggest fight was all about representation.
The whole convention immediately split into two camps, large states versus small states. In one corner, you had big states like Virginia. They wanted representation to be based on population. The more people you have, the more votes you get. Makes sense, right? But in the other corner, you had small states like New Jersey, and they were terrified that this would make them totally irrelevant. So they pushed for equal representation for every state, just like it was under the Articles. The solution to this giant fight became known as the Great Compromise. It was actually pretty clever. They created a two-house legislature. In the House of Representatives, the big states got their way. Representation is based on population. But in the Senate, the small states won. Every single state gets exactly 2 senators, whether you're California or Delaware. And that's the system we still have to this day.
But solving that problem immediately created another, much darker one. Southern states wanted to count their enslaved population to get more representatives and therefore more power in the House, even though, of course, slaves couldn't vote. Northern states said no way. The result was this awful, notorious compromise. Notice how they carefully avoided using the word slave. Instead, for the purpose of representation, enslaved human beings were counted as 3/5 of a person.
So once the document was finally written, the last great battle began, actually getting the states to approve it. And this kicked off a fierce, nationwide debate between two opposing sides, the Federalists, who were all for the new Constitution, and the Anti-Federalists, who were dead set against it. Now, this wasn't just a simple political disagreement. This was a fight for the very soul of America. You had the Federalists, mostly wealthy merchants and city folks, arguing that only a strong national government could bring stability and prosperity. And then you had the Anti-Federalists, mostly small farmers, who were deeply suspicious. They believed a powerful, distant government would crush their liberty and that real freedom was best protected by the states, closer to home. To make their case, Federalists like Alexander Hamilton and James Madison wrote a series of brilliant essays called the Federalist Papers. In this quote here, Hamilton is basically trying to calm fears about a powerful new national army. He's arguing that the people themselves, being armed, could form militias to defend their own rights if needed. Sound familiar? Yeah, that's an argument that echoes in our debates to this very day.
Ultimately, the Federalist arguments, plus a really crucial promise to add a Bill of Rights to protect individual liberties, won the day. The Constitution was ratified. But those fundamental questions raised by the Anti-Federalists, those questions about the balance of power between the government and the people, they never really went away.
So here's the thing to remember. The Constitution wasn't some perfect document handed down by the heavens. It was a practical, messy, and at times pretty ugly series of compromises. This history isn't just in the past. It's baked into the code of our government right now. And it leaves us with a huge question to think about. How do these centuries-old solutions, designed for 18th century problems, continue to define and maybe even challenge the world we live in today?